Welcome to the Indian Silicon Valley podcast. I'm your host, Jivraj, and today I have me a very special guest. This is one person I've waited for long to host. Join me in welcoming Vasanth Kamath, who's the co-founder and CEO of smallcase, which is one of India's leading fintech startups and definitely one of the most innovative companies in our ecosystem at the moment. Thank you so much, Vasanth, for joining me. Incredibly delighted to be hosting you today.
Absolutely, Jivraj. Likewise, thanks so much for having us on your podcast. I think this has been due for way too long, close to a year now, but finally glad we could make it happen.
Absolutely. I always say better late than never. And it's amazing that we're finally doing this because Small Case as a consumer has always fascinated me so much. So to be talking to its creator is definitely a bucket list moment for me. But more importantly, before we go on to, how Small Case is such an innovative as well as, just a disruptive company in general, I would love to know what your abstract thoughts on building a company as a founder is, especially when it comes to, let's say, original solutions, right? Because time and again we talk about a multiple models. Some are of course copycat, and there are multiple things to be told. But when you're creating an original solution, so much of the path is untold, and that's what smallcase has been able to do extremely well. So if you were to maybe take us through your journey and help us understand what you think about original solutions as a founder and how you've been able to figure it out along the way, I think that'd be a great abstract note to start off with.
No, sure, Jivraj. I think like this is something I keep thinking about a lot right now, saying that it's been 6 years since we started Small Case as a company, 5+ years that we've been operating as a business and as a product. And maybe this is something that we didn't do enough. In hindsight, some ways good, some ways bad, but overall, I think we didn't really think about what we were building as a business from day one. I think the idea was that we felt something needed to be built or created in this space, and that's how we started. So there was no very strong, kind of say top-down research to be done, saying that okay, this is the user segment that we're looking to create, looking to cater to, or looking to target. This is what their problems are, and this is how we'll solve it. It was very broad, right? So kind of, and that's I think very common of at least companies that are category creators, because you can't really plan for a lot of things. You can't think of having a set of needs or wants or problems from the user and start solving for that, because then you're not creating something from scratch. But like especially in the case of small case, I think the core idea was that there are two types of investors. One who, and especially when they're looking to participate into equity, one set of folks invest into mutual funds, and then there's another set of folks who build their own portfolios, invest into direct equity or stocks, right? And these were very mutually exclusive groups, say 5 years back at least, as in overlap between these two was very less. I think that was something that we felt would get bridged over time, where it would become more of a life cycle for an investor to start out with mutual funds. That's a great product for most folks to get started with, and eventually, as they would want to build their portfolio, have it have more allocation to their equity, they would want more decision making, they would want more control, they would want more visibility into what they're investing into, and they will eventually go towards the right side of the spectrum, which is building their own stock portfolio. And that's where we felt there was a gap in between. Like the one side is basically you are not, like, for example, let's take the analogy of food, right? In one case, you're what your mom makes at home or what's made at home is basically what you eat. You don't have to think about what needs to be done. And suddenly the other side is where you have to decide what's to be made, get the ingredients for that, cook it, and then finally eat it. So that was very extreme as how we saw it. And that's where something as a middle ground needed to exist, where you have, say, direction that, say, any professional is basically providing in terms of, say, the stock selection, etc. But at the same time, you have the optionality to actually customize things. You have full transparency into what you're investing into. You can basically decide kind of some of the actions that you take on your own portfolio. And that's where small case really came in. So while the concept is unique and original for the industry, I think, and even like when we had the first 3 to 4 years of our journey, we had to be very creative in actually building this, right? Because it's the foundation that we're building. That had to be very first principles. There was no other option, as in there was no, like you said, there was no parallel or equivalent globally that we could look at and say, okay, this is the sequence of events or sequence of things that we need to do and start building it one by one. It had to be, primarily continuing to go back to the same principle that is this in line with what we started with, saying that is this solving that problem for that investor who's basically spent some years into investing in mutual funds and now wants to take more control of their portfolio.
Right.
Because of this, we had to kind of build a lot of new workflows, a lot of new terms, a lot of new pipes and infrastructure that did not even exist. But today it's a little different, as in now we don't necessarily have to think everything from first principles, because that's what the core asset or the foundation has been built already. I think right now what we spend a lot of time, and actually that's helped us kind of do things faster, is actually take solutions, or not solutions, maybe principles from other industries. Because what we're realizing is like, maybe this is finance, maybe this is wealth management, maybe this is investment products that we are building a layer for, but a lot of principles can be borrowed from other industries. Because say, for example, over the last few years, at least last few quarters, we started thinking about how, say, marketplaces work, and looking at different industries, obviously contextualizing what makes sense for us, or say how content licensing or deals work, because it's the same mechanism or underlying dynamic that lies there, that there's a creator, there's a distributor, there's an enabler. And here we lie in a unique position of basically having to architect all three parts with our partners, obviously, but kind of, how each dynamic can work, different situations, it's just become a lot more easier to contextualize and adapt versus having to think first principles.
Got it. No, I think that's very, very useful. And it's just goes back to the point that Smallcase is not just a product anymore. It's an asset class in itself, right? And that's the beauty of the product. But what's more interesting is, for the longest time, you've not deviated focus, and only now is Smallcase slowly becoming a product innovative company where you have ticker tape, you have the gateway, you have the publishing platform, and you have so many adjoining products, right? But talk to us about how that initial journey played out, right? Like what did it mean to create that first set of infrastructure on top of which you can build out ancillary things about, and what was it like to create this category? Because I'm guessing it required a lot of evangelism, a lot of education with the mass market as well, until it became a buzzword, until it became a verb, right? So while we see Smallkin in its current form, which is very famous, what was it like in the first 3-4 years would be interesting to know.
Sure. No, it was purely a concept sell, right? As in, like I said, it wasn't like we could point out to something that's happening in Europe or in the US or in Japan and say that these are developed markets. Something like this has happened there. The same thing will happen here. So we're building that. That would have been way easier. I think we would have been way ahead in our journey if that was the case. But given this was completely novel as a construct in itself, like it's a new form factor, like you said, a new equity asset class in a way that we're building. I think it's required two things. One, more than actually evangelizing this with customers, I think the first step was actually to evangelize this with businesses who would then kind of, further take it to customers and build trust, build credibility into the product class itself. But like a lot of what you mentioned, say, the publisher platform, the gateway, ticker tape, like these are separate product lines and even business lines for us. But when we started, like all of them started from the core concept of small case itself, as in saying that today we have to say, like, let me maybe walk you through some parts of the timeline as such. So I think when we had to start this whole concept, what we realized is you can't build this concept by just saying, small case gives you portfolios and then you can invest in them with your own broker. So this is a, say, app or a property where you can come in, look at portfolio ideas, and then go back to your brokerage and do something, right? Because that used to exist as a concept where, you would have model portfolios that your brokers, research providers, advisors give you. But then the whole process around it was so cumbersome that it was required to basically reimagine or rethink how each step or each task in this process works. So the first step was actually getting a broker partner, because without the transaction capability, you couldn't have built the kind of experience that could make small case a product class that it is right now. So that was the first step. Getting that itself required a lot of, say, explaining what this could become in the next 5 years, which we were clueless. Like, if you really asked me or my co-founders as well, when we started out, we did imagine that this would be the ideal scenario, but we didn't think this would happen in 5 years. We thought it would take at least a decade, and we were like, sure, it might take that much time, but it makes sense to exist. That's why we have to build it. So let's start. But the first broker partner coming on, them evangelizing. In our case, it was obviously Zerodha who kind of integrated, built the first set of pipes or APIs that we could build this entire experience on, took it to users, introduced it in the way that we wanted it to be kind of positioned as well as a product class versus another platform where you can invest into stocks, right? So, like, for them to be able to also kind of take this to their client base, their user base, and actually put across this message, there was a lot of front loading that we had to do to convince them to basically say that this could become large, right? So we had to walk them through all these potential scenarios that could unfold as part of our vision. The next step from that was, if you're building a product class, it can't be on one broker, right? Then it's just basically a feature for that broking platform versus really a product class. It has to be ubiquitous. So how do you go to the next broker? How do you go to the third, fourth, fifth? And different sets of, say, conversations, different sets of pitches, different sets of concept cells that happened at each point. But that is what it was required to ensure that, say, like today, 95% of all demat accounts can transact into small case, but we required to get to 15 brokers to do that. Now, the solutioning of how it can go on to each broker in a fully compliant manner, what needs to be done on the infrastructure side, where does the data need to be hosted, what are the kind of exchanges that need to happen on both a transaction level as well as, information level, all of that needed to be figured out over time, and all of this were results of these conversations and concept cells that we had to do. Now the next step was, you can't just, again, it's a product class, you can't just have one entity or one individual creating these small cases. We need to kind of further extend that part so that more creators, or what we call them small case managers, can start doing this. That's where Publisher started from. Today, now it's obviously a full-fledged business in a box solution for over 200 investment managers and advisors, but that's where Publisher started from. Gateway was started because we realized that you can't just, again, have brokers taking this product to clients. You needed a different set of digital properties or ecosystems to also kind of popularize this, evangelize this. So Gateway was first started as an attempt to basically say, how can we take small cases, the discovery, the origination, the transaction, beyond the broking shelf spaces. Ticker was a way for people to create their own small cases. When they were creating their own small cases, they were like, is there a tool to basically screen stocks that we could use? Ticker started out from there. It was called Small Case Screener first. And then the more we started getting user feedback, we figured out that there needs to exist a parallel ecosystem where things are more around information, content, data, tools versus just the end product, which is a small case. So that's where Ticker was started. So all of this was, again, coming from the core that something like small case needs to exist, and then each of them kind of individually develop to become independent business lines. But I think like, we didn't think about all of this having the sort of use cases when we started building those also, or even in the earlier parts of the journey.
Fair enough. No, but I think it speaks to the fact that, if you're building the building blocks of a category creating company, the rest of it follows. And then, you can always fall back to the basics and repeat that process. I think that's what I find very fascinating. And through my research also was just bamboozled by. But I think another adjoining thing to what you mentioned, right? Now that all of these product innovations are happening, there are two sides to it. One is, of course, customer feedback, and I'll come to that in a moment. But now that you have so many of these product lines, how does small case internally function, right? So one is, how do you manage the org design with all of this happening? Two is, of course, like what makes this culture propagate, right? So it's one thing to say that, okay, we'll do a lot of things, or maybe we'll start a lot of products if need be, but it's another thing to execute it, and it's another thing to make it happen, which small case has, of course, evidently done very well. So if you can maybe address these two aspects around how does the product look like with all of these internal demarcations, as well as what the culture is that blossoms all of these innovations, I think that'd be super helpful for everyone listening in.
Sure, I think the first question, I think, you mentioned org design, and that's something that I think is always or constantly evolving, right? You can't really kind of have something and just stick to it always. Like we are, for example, when we started out, again, it was simpler just because, there was one platform that we had to build, which was the investor facing experience where they can discover, create, invest in small cases, track, manage, etc. But as some of these other product lines started coming in, I think the call we took was a little bit of a gutsy one, or risky one, at least at that point, that we have not been a function oriented org design, as in we haven't built it that way. It's been more building full-fledged teams for each product line or each business unit, right? So uh, the small case, what we do with brokers is one business unit internally. What we work with managers, the publisher platform, is another business unit. Uh, the third one, which is say Gateway, is another business unit. Our app, which we launched, say, a couple of years back, is another business unit. Ticket Tape is another business unit. So all of these, instead of saying, these are different business units, you might have a business or sales team that is unique or built for these business units. We actually built the entire orgs or full-fledged capabilities for each of them. So there's no common design team. There's no, say, common product team. There's no common engineering team. You have central functions which are around, say, people, finance, compliance, say, uh, brand design as well now. But otherwise, say, each of these business units has dedicated bandwidth, has dedicated leadership or leads for, say, product, business, engineering, who are owners for that business unit. And they have to basically continue recruiting, building the team, hiring people, and kind of building capacity for what they want to do. So that was, I think, an interesting call. As in, obviously, if things hadn't worked out as they did, it would have been really expensive to kind of maintain this kind of a org design as well. But thankfully for us, it all worked out. And like success, for example, say Ticker Tape is now another company altogether, right? We just moved it into a subsidiary company late last year, and now that's a separate team with a separate identity that we're looking to build over there. So that's how kind of it's helped us actually compartmentalize, or like you said, divide each of these different products, each of them having their own roadmaps, and each of them having also the capability to continue delivering on that, versus priorities going to one over the other, which means that, say, today the priority is to kind of build Gateway, so it's not like you divert resources, people, efforts, time into one specific thing. Everything keeps building by its own. One has this period where they're seeing a lot of scale, they're seeing a lot of growth. That's where that team builds itself. In a period of redundancy, or say in a period of where there's not much activity there, there's obviously flexibility to kind of move them across things, but it's not designed that way. As in, people come in knowing that they're going to be working on this certain product line. This is the role that they have to play, and that gives them a lot of, say, mind share and time to just focus on that piece. So I think that's been very helpful for us. Today, I think we are starting to realize that some of, say, these teams that we're building, or some of the people might function more effectively if it was built at a central level. That's where we're taking those calls to again say, maybe this needs to be a central function, maybe this needs to be a split function where there's central leadership, but then again, they're divided among these different business units. But that's how it's continuously evolving. And I think that's where kind of a lot of thought needs to be put in, because it's like a slightly wrong decision at this scale basically can lead to periods of chaos, confusion, uncertainty, etc. So that's one thing that we continuously are on top of. I think the other thing you asked around saying, how do you kind of build this culture is because of the org design, it's pretty easy to kind of have everyone focus towards one thing versus saying, okay, there are five different things inside small case. How do we kind of, know what is the most important thing to focus on? Like it's innate human behavior to basically say, I want to be contributing where it matters the most, like what changes the companies or the businesses fortunes in a bigger way. That's where I want to be, because that means they'll have higher chance of being noticed, rewarded, incentivized, etc. But that's where having this kind of org design itself has made it easier for the motivations to stay intact. Otherwise, I think some things that we do at a more broader level has just been, kind of being transparent in the good way. That's helped us a lot. Uh, like a part of that is also kind of not having restrictive processes, having more constructive processes. There might be areas where things could go wrong, but don't try to curb them from day one, right? As in, uh, let things foster fester however they should. And then if you see something wrong happening, then you start, being restrictive there. It's like, just to give an analogy to how regulations also work, like it's very similar to how, say, US regulators work, maybe not the right way to also, but then everything is left open, and then as problems, issues keep coming in, you try and solve them. Whereas, say, in India, it's unless it's foolproof and there's no uh, instance or possibility of something failing, they don't open anything up. So both work differently, but when you're dealing with people, obviously one makes sense over the other. So giving trust is always the first thing. You can't expect trust without giving it. So I think that's been interesting for us. uh, Now more recently, I think also continuing to think first principles, staying creative has been more and more important, because now we're starting to get in more senior folks. Leadership team is coming from places where they've done things before, and they obviously come in saying that, oh, these 10 things don't happen here, maybe I should just take what we used to do in the previous organizations, in my previous experiences and stints, and basically replicate that over here. I think it's very easy and convenient to do that, because you can always justify it saying, this is how it's worked somewhere else, this is a starting point, we'll continue evolving it. But I think that's again something that we've been very focused on, to basically say, no, if it doesn't make sense, we won't borrow some of the practices or processes, because that gets very hard and plus time intensive to basically correct. So rather, let's not do certain things. We know the downsides, we know the risks, but let that happen. Once you start seeing bad behavior somewhere, that's where you constrain it or restrict it versus doing it from day one.
Fair enough. No, I think I love how detailed that was, in the sense that it shows that demarcations are necessary. It shows the focus of the leadership on such org design principles as well, which has, of course, led to the success of small case. But it's interesting on the second part, Vasanth, quickly doubling down. How do you, as a founder, especially as a first time founder, or understand and then cope up with the importance of culture? Because I'm guessing that it must have been an evolving journey for you as well, and it still continues to be so. But if you can maybe help us understand that, how deliberate are you as a founder on the culture traits of the organization, and what it means to scale it as the company grows, right? On the other aspects of when it is a culture shock for senior leadership, what do you do? What are some more intricate things that maybe if you can give us from practical examples, I think that would be super helpful.
No, sure. I think like it's it's not something that we have, what do you call it, consciously tried to keep repeating and getting people to kind of adhere to it. It's not like, say, we have a culture book or anything of that sort. I think what's like, I strongly believe that culture starts honestly from the top, as in however flat you say an hierarchy is or a company is, like what the founders do, how they behave, is going to be where the culture starts from. Uh, that starts becoming a larger group, where then there's a core team, there's a leadership team, and that's what people start kind of trying to mimic or trying to copy, right? So in our case, it's been easy for the first 4 years out of a 6 year journey, purely because we were a small team, right? We were maybe touching 50 people, I think 2 to 3 years back. A couple of things that have happened is where we've gone from this 50 to 300 over the last 2 to 3 years, as well as the whole concept of working remotely, which we have now embraced. But then I think both these things have required us to basically start being more involved, where we see things not going right, right? Like now this is something that we're starting to see more of, where new folks come in, they come in and they basically see that, okay, from their previous organizations, again, they've always required this, where's the power center at, right? Like whatever I need to do, like who do I need to please, who do I need to validate, who do I need to kind of work in accordance with, so that my job is easy, my work is easy, it gets approved, everything. So trying to basically identify that and work with that, but we've never been that set kind of people at all, in the sense it's always been what's right to do, not just for the business but also for the user, has been at the core of all of this. So that's like, these are new things that we're starting to deal with, and the only way to kind of address this is basically stop it at where it starts, actually festering, right? As in, start speaking to people and tell them that, or actually demonstrate it as well, saying that, one person might like a certain thing, but that's not the reason why it's going to get approved or why it's going to go. You have to kind of have collective consensus around a bunch of things that maybe sometimes delays things, but overall, I think in the long term, it makes it just better to kind of encourage that versus not.
Fair enough. No, I think that's helpful and very, very important to emphasize, because I mean, if you're handling the root cause, I think that takes care of the rest. So super to hear that. I think an ancillary point to culture, and since we've spoken about this, is of course the team. And an interesting aspect with the co-founders is that, there's always a lot of conventional wisdom stating that if you're not from a certain industry, you're more likely to disrupt it. In your case, that does not happen to be the case, and you actually used the experience you had from your background in capital markets. You mentioned in the past that you come from a family which had exposure to capital markets early on, and so you knew about it more or less, right? And you use that to some degree to innovate the way you have in small case. What I'm trying to allude to is pretty much as to how you think about building the team at small case. Is it more like centered around particular disciplines? Is it centered around certain traits that you look out for? But what's the general hack to building a solid team that is innovative in nature and that can uphold certain cultural traits? I think that would be a great segment to understand.
No, sure, Jivraj. I think maybe I'll start this from the founding team again, as in the three of us who started Small Case. Like, to be honest, like, while I come from a family that's been into the stock markets, both from a user side as well as from a provider or a business side as well, it's not been extremely helpful, to be honest. As in, I think the fact where it's helped is that what I'm doing is not very alien or completely alien to my family, right? And that's where I got encouragement to basically do things, because they understood things very broadly, but even that didn't mean like there was total belief or faith in what we were building, because like I said, it was something that was a concept very hard to kind of imagine or visualize when you're just talking, saying that this is what we want to build in 5 years, and they're like, that's not how things work, right? So maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but at least they were broadly supported towards the fact that, saying that, okay, we know that you're doing something in an area that we broadly understand, right? But like, it's also helped in ways where, say, when you're starting from scratch, you definitely need a support system of people who know other people, who understand the language of the industry that you're operating in, who can open doors for you, have some learnings, have some expertise to kind of help you with. But honestly, I think kind of that's where my co-founders came in from. Like, they have experience in the financial services space, both from the product side of things as well as from the technology or the engineering side of things, and that was really invaluable, right? As in, like you mentioned, this conventional way of thinking. Like, before starting Small Case, I was at this company where we used to analyze startups. Our customers were venture capital firms, they were corporate development units at businesses who wanted to identify the top or the breakout companies in a certain space. And just going by that, it's very easy to kind of just look at what's on paper and say, yeah, you need a certain formula to be there in the founding team that, oh yes, if this guy comes from, say, a FANG company, or this person has done this in the past, it kind of fits, because that's how, say, if you're sifting through a lot of things, if you have to prioritize or filter out certain things, maybe that's one of the most important factors that you look into. But I think over time, I think what I've realized is, like, uh, especially in founders, it's not the experience, it's not the skill sets that you need. What you need in a co-founder is compatibility and trust, as in experience, skill set, all of that you can hire for, you can buy your way into it. But then if the founders don't trust each other, if they're not aligned in the way that you think, if, say, you don't understand each other's motivations, like even simple things like just reading what each other's reactions or faces when presented with certain information means, it becomes very hard to take decisions, and that becomes more and more tougher as the company continues to scale. Because if different people have different motivations, they will keep pulling the other along the, and then you're just stuck in the middle somewhere, right? So, and that translates to the core and leadership team also, where you need to operate as one unit, like both internally, externally, as in you can't keep second guessing, saying that, oh, that person is thinking that way. That's where most things start going wrong, like politics, ego, all of that starts coming in. But I think if it doesn't start with founders, it's not impossible, but it makes for a very, very bumpy ride and journey ahead, right? So in our case, on the team side of things, I think like one thing, we've been super fortunate, and touch wood to this, like we've got a large part of the team being users of the product first, and then coming in to actually say, we want to build this as well. And that's great for multiple reasons, right? Because they are coming in with the intent of saying, we understand what you are building. We also want to build that. I wouldn't call it bad, but the tougher part about this is just that everybody is super opinionated on the product because they're all users. So kind of shipping anything, etc. You have to justify internally before you even take it out there and start to see what feedback is. Say you are held much more accountable for decisions that you take, because again, they are users. So if you're taking something that isn't user first, your team is the first one to point it out and say that, as a user, I wouldn't like this at all, so I don't think we should do it. So it becomes a little slower, but then again, great trade-off for the long term. But it becomes a little tough to kind of also get things through there. But that's where I think just having that advantage of people coming to us and saying, I want to build this, I want to be part of this journey, I want to be part of the team that's building this product, has been great. I think in terms of traits that I personally look at when we are interviewing folks, is one is basically depth. I think the kind of depth that they go into while either doing something or even thinking about something, as in just how thoughtful they are about what they've done in the past or what they want to do, speaks a lot about what their motivations are. And the second thing is just basically, and I do this a lot while like interviewing folks or speaking to them, that push them into areas where I know that they don't have the answer, or they never had the answer. Like, for example, say, so someone was building a product, like, why did you build this feature? Like, if it worked or if it did not work. But if the answer is something like no, because someone else told me to do it, or something like that, as in the ability to basically say, that I don't know why we did this, or I don't know why I want to do this, that speaks again a lot, just because it kind of is a leading indicator of maturity there. So I just look for these two characteristics. If they're very thoughtful, they go deep into anything that they're working on or thinking about, at the same time, whether kind of there is the ability to mature over time.
Got it. I think that's incredible, purely because I think very unique traits are looking for depth and that sense of maturity, and the fact that you want people to say I don't know and be accepting of it is just like a phenomenal cue for everyone listening as well, and normalizes that belief as opposed to us wanting to know everything and being know it all. So I think that's super to echo. I think this entire segment has been phenomenal, and I'd like to quickly just go back to the fact around, let's say consumer insights and feedback cycles, right? Now that the product in and of itself is based so much on top of what consumers believe, I'm guessing so much of it is noise as well, right? Not every feature that I perhaps request as a user is something that Smallcase can build. How do you manage to perhaps, again, two parts to it? One, do this initially, right? Because I'm guessing that you can't break focus initially when you're trying to find product market fit and establish yourself. And of course, the second side to it is, now that you have so many adjacent products as well, what do you focus on and how? And how do you maintain this at scale, considering that you have critical mass now? Will be very interesting just from a product mindset and how, great products get built. So yeah, would love to hear that from you.
No, sure. I think it goes back to what we discussed first, saying that, there's a core rational idea, principle, whatever you call it in mind, saying that this is what we want to build. And there's a direction that you also define, saying that, these are the things we'll do. You don't define the things you won't do, but that has to happen over time. But having that is very, very helpful, because that's what binds you to sticking to a certain thing that you've decided much earlier. And that has to be open-ended or framed in the manner that, it doesn't restrict you, but again, you can do more things with it. But like, if we had gone about this very logically or rationally, where, we are saying, okay, we need to solve this person's problem, or this is a personal problem that I need to solve, you could basically, if you call it pivot, you call it keep evolving, you call it keep changing the whole idea. That could happen because things like this keep getting questioned to varying degrees at different points in time, right? But I think just the fact that it's very helpful to have a base or a foundation that you keep going back to and saying, this is what we want to do and this is why we're doing it, and then start looking at feedback and contextualizing that helps a lot. Like a lot of the new products, say for example, say the publisher platform, I think our first independent manager who used it, his name is Alok. He's talked about this quite a lot on his social media as well, where he just came and said, is this possible? I would want to do this. Why I'm going into this specific thing is, this was something that we always wanted to do, as in we knew that if this small case has to be a product class, we need to democratize the manufacturing aspect of it. We need more people who are registered entities to come and create small cases. Now, from a timing perspective, when do you do this? From who is the early adopter for this? For in the case of, say, for example, brokers, it was Zerodha, and we couldn't have asked for a better partner to really start out with. The same was in the case of Alok, right? As in, he came in, he said, I want to do this. And if we had to go out finding, the first user for this, that would have been incredibly tough, because then you are starting to pitch a product into someone's workflow versus kind of building what you want to build and them adapting a little bit to it. As in, there has to be some compromise at both sides in order to kind of find this product market fit, like you mentioned. But that's where, say, publisher was started because Alok reached out and said, I want to do this. I think he reached out in a certain month, and after 6 months back, we got back to him. Like, we spoke at that point, understood his requirements, and said it takes some time. But 6 months later, we figured the timing is right, and we had someone who really wanted to kind of build it. You have to be open-minded. You have to be creative, imaginative, to basically say, okay, we don't know what we're building, but these things should get solved from there on. Similarly, in, say, the gateways case, this came from two different use cases. Like, for example, money control team came to us and said, we would like to use something like a gateway. And we always knew that something like a gateway should exist. Or, say, an asset manager, then Reliance Nippon, now Nippon, one of the heads of their ETF business came to us and said, this is very interesting. You're doing it for stocks, let's do it for ETFs. And these are great to basically start building out products, because you have a core, that this has to be done at some point of time. Now you identify an anchor use case to basically start building towards. Ticker tape, again, like I said, it was a user saying that you're helping me you're asking me to create a small case, but I have an idea, but how do I actually translate it into what stocks go there? So give me a screener went into more information, etc. So that has been getting to PMF has been easier there, because kind of, again, been very fortunate to chance upon or have the right set of people write into us and say that, hey, we would want to be part of kind of being the first use case. There will be mistakes, there will be bumps, but that's fine. As in, this is something that we really want to do also. Now I think the and like, because again of the org design, it's just been easier to kind of keep taking this feedback, like the feedback cycles you're mentioning. I think it's just been easier because each of them have dedicated bandwidth towards what they need to build. They're building it for a certain user persona, they're building it for a certain use case, and they need to keep firing on that. Today it started becoming a little more uh, you know interesting, intriguing, just because some of these parts are now also coming together as an ecosystem right now. You don't have, like, when we got to from one independent manager using publisher to 50, it was basically us going and telling them, this is one part of your operations workflow, that we can streamline and can work. Come onto the publisher platform, they get onboarded, they use it, and then they start seeing other features and start, the value prop becomes a lot larger for them. Today, the kind of people who want to use our different products are not coming in with that frame of mind, right? These are, say for example, someone is registering themselves or becoming a manager because there exists a publisher platform that they can use, right? Like, you would have seen this in, say, the case of Substack. Like, newsletters were already always around, but now, say, people are starting independent writing businesses because there exists Substack, not because they didn't want to do it before or anything like that, right? I think the same thing is happening here, which is where now we have to be a lot more deliberate about how we are building this as an ecosystem, build that, say, kind of playbook there, or you call it a guiding doc, or say certain philosophy or ethos of the platform that we need to build, because that's where things start to also overlap with each other. Like, you have to ensure that the user has the best experience while catering for these individual use cases as well. So it's been easy, to be honest, just because these were separate ones. They were not really coming together. Like, Alok started his business, he could, like, this is just an example to illustrate this. Like, Alok, when he came onto the platform, he got his own website, like at weekininvesting.smallcase.com. He put his own products there. Now he asked his users to use this instead of something else. Today, Alok Small Case is there on a broker platform, one of our broker partners. It's there on the Small Case app. It's there on even a third party, say, gateway user as well. Now you are basically looking at it from 4 different lenses, a certain, workflow, right? From the user's perspective first, then the manager, then the gateway partner, then the broker, and also the Small Case, tying all this together. So that started becoming a little more interesting, just from a problem solving perspective. But for sure, I think, like, how we manage these feedback cycles, how we prioritize among different things, there has to be a more structured framework to this, and that's something that is a work in progress. But hopefully, maybe in a year and a half's time, I can come back and talk about some of the learnings that we saw through this phase as well.
Fair enough. And I think that makes a lot of sense in this. But from what I hear is, initially you have to listen to most things and figure out and be, I think, courageous enough to just tread those pathways. And eventually you have to just figure out a process to the madness. So I think that's super interesting. And those stories are very interesting to know, because it's just amazing how the publisher platform has, made this financial creators as an entire audience now, right? Shopify for financial managers, Substack for financial managers, you can call it whatnot, but it's just a phenomenal what it's done to the industry. So kudos to the Small Case team on that. As we go on to concludatory phases, another very interesting dimension for Small Case is the number of stakeholders you have, right? So a bunch of the things that you do requires brokers, requires partners, requires multiple kinds of audiences as well, right? There's a consumer on the end of Small Case. There's a different kind of consumer for the publisher platform, as we spoke about. Help us understand that, when we look at such different personas. What do you, as the leadership, do to construct and ensure? I know all of it must flow from the org design as well, but how difficult or not so difficult does stakeholder management get in small case, and how do you tackle that aspect of things? I think that would be super fascinating to know, Vasant.
No, absolutely. I think this is not easy at all. This is one of the more tougher things we have to do, not just because of the kind of partners that we have. Like these are some of the largest, fastest growing, most respected institutions and brands we of in the financial space that we work with, but also because of the diverse nature of their own businesses, their own priorities, their own sets of, say, how their teams are, who is leading stuff. Things keep changing over there, so that constant nature of evolving priorities and targets in their end is also very interesting to deal with. Definitely makes it a lot more tougher as well. I think again the same thing like I mentioned earlier, right? It was easier at the start because there was one set of folks that you are basically serving a use case towards, and you keep building for that. When things start to overlap, that's where you need to be a lot more uh, one. You need to define it very well as to what the platform, what small case and the products and the platform gives to them, and that can't be like five things, right? That has to be at max two things, or just to keep it simpler, it has to be one set of things that kind of they can expect from this, and you just need to stick to that. As in, you can't uh, keep changing this too often, because like I said, this is uh, stakeholder management. This is not really companies you're talking to, these are people you're talking to, and then people have their own thought processes, they have their own ideologies about things, which keeps changing. So keeping it very simple and saying, we our use case for you, or we exist for you for this set of things, and that will always remain constant, and that won't change. We'll be consistent to that, we'll keep sticking to that. Anything that keeps coming in over time is not going to get added to that. It will just be like a bonus thing, but we don't know whether that will persist, that will continue, that might die off, etc. But these are the three things. This is what we'll stick by, and that's what you need to expect from us. There will definitely be more things as we continue growing, as you continue growing, as a new set of users, consumers, investors come onto the platform. But let's not move away from these three things, because these will be sacrosanct and these will continue to always exist. That has helped a lot. I think the second thing that's helped is basically just being upfront and transparent, right? Saying that, like, right from early days, kind of one thing that we've always said is the things that we will pick up, which is on the business side or the partner side, has to make sense for the other partners. Like, we won't pick up things that is only, say, custom to you. We do that as well, but only where it makes sense. So that sense of, what do you call it, being reasonable has to exist from both sides, to say, maybe this won't help others, but sure, we'll pick this up and we'll ship this out. Or saying that, this is a use case that doesn't make sense for anybody, let's we are not going to pick this up. Being upfront and transparent about that is super useful. As in, it might seem like in the short term you're saying no to someone, but then I think in the long term that actually builds more trust, because you are demonstrating or staying consistent on what you are basically saying. And that's what trust is, right? It's basically being consistent time and time over again. For example, like, we released our product roadmap to the manager community, saying that these are the things that we're picking up. This is what stages they're in, divided into different objectives. And you can find that whenever you want to, any change that happens, you can keep tracking it over there. You have feature requests, you put in, we'll keep adding it over here, and we'll tell you how we're thinking about picking this up. So maybe that's over communicating, being maybe radically transparent to some degree, but that just helps. As in, you'll have to find the right degree where it makes sense, where it doesn't, but that definitely helps a lot. I think more recently also, what started helping us a lot over there is just basically keeping the user first, right? As in, like, having uh, the user side of things also there, because someone has to stand for the user. And again, contextualizing everything that we speak about from the user lens, from the user's journey, from their motivations, their requirements, again makes it simpler to have a lot of these conversations, whether to build something new, which we have to get their buy-in for, or whether to not do something. It just basically helps to basically take a user first lens or approach to that as well. But yeah, I think it's not an easy job. I think like today we work with over 300 plus partners, and handling all of that while sticking to one core principle of saying everything revolves around small case. It's the core, and the user is the first one to that we have to kind of continue building for. It's a very complex but interesting thing to do.
Yeah, I think it sounds very interesting. And what I'm hearing is just like simply managing expectations. That remains to be the core. And I love how you elaborately explained and candidly explained how this works. So that's super interesting to hear. One of the other and maybe last challenges that I want to speak about is the external facing situations in a regulated industry, right? Considering that you are in the financial services industry and where regulations are almost always evolving. It's something that requires a lot of care, a lot of trust within the consumers as well. How do you evolve with it? Because it's one thing to innovate and control things that you're always doing at the company, but it's another thing to be impacted by external circumstances, right? So when you are in a regulated industry with external forces, what do you do as a founder? Has that ever been a botheration, or how do you think about the regulations aspect of things when building in fintech? That would be one to hear from as well, Vasant.
No, sure. I think there are multiple regulators in the fintech space. We work with the capital markets regulator, and full credit to them. They've been super accessible. They are very responsive. Kind of they understand things. But like I said in the like earlier, right, that they won't take a step because there is one use case for it unless kind of it's foolproof. Like they will want to restrict any chances of anything going wrong, and that's a good way to do it versus say what you see regulators in other countries doing it just purely because kind of you know in a land like India where the population is so high, the number of minds that are working to figure out workarounds and loopholes in any process or workflow, you'll be amazed by it, right? So it totally makes sense. But that's it, kind of, the accessibility or the responsiveness of the regulator has never failed to kind of amaze us. I think how we look at it is basically the regulations or the regulator is another stakeholder and an important one. So a lot of what I spoke about saying handling our partners and those businesses continue to be the same, except that in like the only additional thing in this case is that we have always been on the right side of things, as in like anything is gray, we won't touch that. Like if anything, forget like saying, this is not defined today, so we'll do that. That's gray, that's black, whatever you call it. But we've always been on the right and white side of things. And we've just been consistent with it again. I think, again, just sticking to the same framework or principles, there's a lot of advantage to doing that. It's not easy or obvious to understand why, as in you ideally should basically say, you should keep evolving, you should keep changing your mind, etc. But having a set of things that are written in stone and just sticking to that, and that's for every stakeholder, right? Be it our partners, be it the regulator, be it the consumer or our user, that is the only way to build trust and credibility over the long term. And in a business like ours, it's even more important to kind of do that purely because you're dealing with people's hard-earned money, their savings, etc. So kind of reputation or that credibility is just more important to build. But I think that's something that we've been very clear on right from the start, that if something is not clear, we don't go ahead with it. If something has any chance of kind of being a reputation risk for us, better not do it. Like even if you think that there's 5%, maybe it can become 10%, no point, let's not do it. As in, those are things we just completely stay away from.
Fair enough. I think that's evidently clear and a great rule of thumb as well. Just being on the right side and being fundamentally strong matters. finally, before I go on to the last set of questions about you personally, I'm sure everyone listening in would love a sneak peek into what's next for small case, considering that there's so much innovation. With whatever little you can share with us, maybe, help us understand, there have been talks around when small case is going to go international, because I'm sure that there is evident demand for something of the kind in international markets as well. And with all that is happening, with fintech being the rage of the ecosystem, right, and valuation shooting up and whatnot, is there something more that we are waiting to see from small case in the next maybe 12 to 15 months? I think that's one thing I would love to touch upon.
No, sure. I think something completely new, a few things on the anvil. I think and I don't want to obviously kind of
Of
take
course.
away from the team that's building it, but it'll come over time. But I think few things that we're doing on the small case side, I think that's interesting. I'll come to the international part, but I think on serving the India market for the users here, I think one thing we see very strong is basically what we've done for Indian stocks as well as Indian ETFs could be extended to other asset classes. Two reasons. I think one is we are seeing the same set of problems or challenges in other assets. Now you can call them, say, global equities. You can talk about bonds. You can talk about even crypto, for example, right? And that's where the whole accessibility for the retail investor in understanding what this is, the issue or the problem in selecting the constituents that they should be essentially investing into, that's common for some of these asset classes. It might not be for something like, say, a mutual fund, so we might not go there, but say for US equities, as well as, say, for example, like crypto, the form factor of small case really works very well. It extends very well to solving those challenges as well. So that's something that we're actively working on. I think the second thing or reason why this makes sense is also that you can have very interesting combinations or very interesting exposures or products if you kind of start combining all of this versus just being restricted to the domestic universe. Like today we have an electric mobility small case, which gives you exposure to the electric vehicles trend or phenomenon that's playing out, but there's only Indian stocks in it. Like an ideal way to play that theme would be take a global exposure to it. So that's something that we're very bullish on. I think on the international side, definitely something that has merit, very strong merit as well. We are seeing this actually play out in both developed markets as well as emerging markets. So that's how we're thinking about it, that there are very solid use cases in both of these markets. In the developed markets, it might be more as an enabler, like we license a technology out, we get into some sort of partnership with one of the businesses there and slowly see how that basically pans out. Whereas, say, in emerging markets, a lot of them in Southeast Asia or, say, in South America, that are actually where India was, say, 3 to 4 years back when we started here. So there's a lot of value to actually going there and replicating the entire stack, not just small case as a concept, but also publisher, gateway, ticker tape, and more. So that's something that we want to do for sure. I don't know where we will be in a position to do, just because there's too much happening on the Indian side of things itself, more new things coming on our plate or roadmap. But I think we'll take some starting steps to that this year, because it's important for us to diversify as a business, not just by asset class, but also geographically as well.
Absolutely. And I think all of us will be rooting for it. So super glad to hear that.
Thank you so much.
To end this conversation, I have a series of 2 to 3 questions which are similar in nature that I ask each founder before ending the episode. The first one there for you, Vasanth, is I'm sure that, I think you graduated from IIT Kharagpur in 2013. You had a job or two, and then you started off small case. What I'm trying to allude you to is maybe as a first time founder, what does it mean and how have you evolved through this journey personally? If you maybe can give us a insight view of that, because it's just amazing that companies continue to grow at such a evolving velocity, but we often forget how the founders or the people building it have evolved over that journey. So if you can maybe tell us how Vasanth was when Smallcase was starting out in 2016 to who he is right now, I think that would be super fascinating to hear.
Sure. I think this is something I keep thinking about a lot as well, right? As in what's changed in me over the last quarter. half years, half a decade, etc. But I think one big change that I've seen in myself, and like this is something that people around me have kept pointing out, is that I used to be very impressionable, very excitable, say 5-6 years back. Become a lot more well balanced, sober uh, now. Like I don't know if you've seen this, Juvraj, where there's this. I'll maybe share it with you on chat post this, but there's this graph where kind of they show a founder's temperament versus the time they've been a founder. Like there's euphoria on one end, there's paranoia, terror, horror on the other end, and every day is basically just going through the extremes, and over time you basically start going towards the middle. I think that's been true for me completely. Like my co-founders actually are not like that. They've never been like that. They've been always towards the middle of that graph. But that's kind of something that I like. Any meeting, be it with a prospective teammate, say a business meeting, something very random, like either I go into this whole phase of saying, oh shit, everything is over for us, or that this is just going to make our business grow 100x. Every single meeting used to be there, and kind of I think that's where one thing that's changed is just basically one, being a lot more balanced, being very steady about things, not getting easily excited by everything, just giving everything its time. And second, just reading people better. I think that's again a superpower that I've luckily been able to hone over the years, where it's not right to say that I stereotype every person, but it's helpful for sure, because kind of you give them the benefit after that, a benefit of the doubt, where you don't stereotype them and just keep them there. But there's obviously between the lines, the nuances, the grays between the white and black that you can bucket them into. But kind of it's become much faster to basically understand a person in like 10-15 minutes. If you get there, then uh, it just makes the whole process a lot more efficient and effective. But yeah, these two things for sure.
Awesome. No, I think those are perfect because with my brief experience of talking to founders on the show, I just realized that the firefighting of each day just makes it the sinusoidal curve, as you mentioned, just becomes very easy to go for. And that becomes the steady state for founders anyway. So, I mean, no low is too low, no high is too high after that. It's just the process that matters. And it's wonderful to have that reiterated here. The other aspect that I want to touch upon is I think there's been an evident, I mean, considering that you're building part of the future and that it requires a lot of foresight in developing original solutions, if you can tell us what are some of your thinking principles, right? Because you've been very clear from the start, and I've heard you say in the past that you want small case to become a verb, which it has now.
Sorry, a common noun, not a verb.
A
I think
common
that's
noun, yeah. A common noun, my bad there. And it has very evidently, it's become an asset class in itself. And soon, that is going to become the rage. But what do you think are some other principles that just help you think ahead, maybe, right? I don't know if I'm being able to articulate this fair enough, but the idea is that considering you're building something so category creating that requires part of building the future, how do you look at the future and what helps you develop a sense of foresight is what I want to decode.
I think, look, let me try to take a stab at that. But I think a couple of things, and both are linked. One's that everyone or everything really starts from zero, right? As in, there's no doubting that. I think that's where a lot of things go wrong, to say that, we're not really starting from zero, because there's some experience, there's some groundwork done, etc. But practically everything really just starts from zero. And there's nothing to say that, say, I want to, for example, just be a really good photographer in 10 years. I can start today. I don't have to I don't, it's not that I should have started 10 years back. I should have started 5 years back. So, and that's just become more and more easier over time, as with technology, with just, everything being available on the cloud and in a click. I think understanding or realizing or recognizing the fact that everything or everyone just starts from zero, that's interesting. I think the second one has been that there's nothing really impossible, and that goes a lot towards kind of how we build product, how we do business, how we kind of think of growth as well. That like I told you, like when we started, there were a bunch of folks from my family, from the industry, who said, this can't happen. They're like, this nobody would, there's no takers for this. People in the industry won't support. That's not how things are done. There are all these unsaid rules, structures built, but like it's all about the people that you're working with. If you can convince them, it might take time, but it's all about that. As in, anything is possible. Like whatever's happened today globally, or since civilization started, has just been about people saying that yes, let's do this, versus saying, oh, it wasn't possible, hence maybe we are not the ones to do it. But and that's taught me about saying, the narrative, the messaging, the pitch, the story that you basically craft and tell people to get them onto your site, to show them what their win is, to show them how the future might look. That's supremely important in whatever you do, right? Be it and that translates to anything, even a simple WhatsApp message, to say what you put on an email, to how you do a call. If that is missing, then you're not really being true to kind of what you want to build out. But I think these two things keep kind of coming back into anything that I do, that everyone starts from zero. So there's nothing like, oh, he's just starting out or she's just starting out, they won't be successful this fast. Everything just starts from scratch. And the second thing is that nothing's really impossible. Both of them kind of link to a certain extent.
Absolutely. I love the linkage. In fact, if everybody starts from zero with the belief that nothing is impossible, I'm sure there are mountains to conquer. So phenomenal to hear that. This has been awesome, Vasanth. I think there's so much of diversity throughout the conversation and so many core company building lessons. As we end this, I think I'm not sure if this would be a fitting end, but I would love to go back to your primary motivation that maybe helps you deliver day in, day out to date, right? Maybe if you can talk to us about what breeds the entrepreneur in you, what motivates you to build small case as in its entirety, and what helps you just show up every day despite the bad and the good. I think that would be a perfect close to what has been a phenomenal conversation.
uh, I think different things at different points. One thing that's stayed constant though has been just basically the inclination to learn or curiosity, right? As in, if you look at any assignment or exercise or any conversation from that lens, to say, let's figure out what we can learn from this, versus trying to say, okay, this is the agenda, this is what we need to do, and just do it in that manner, it just helps a lot, right? Because kind of the how the conversation goes, what you talk about, your energy, your participation, your involvement, all of that really changes. So I think that's something that's always been very helpful. uh, the other thing that's more recent, I think, for particularly for the last 2 to 3 years, as we've scaled as a business, has been the core motivation has become responsibility. As in, there's a lot of responsibility on us in a business, and on three of us as founders, to kind of continue delivering what is expected from us to different stakeholders, right? So I think that kind of also, you don't look at it like a burden here, as in it's more like, continuing to push on doing the right things, because there are expectations, and that responsibility is what kind of gets you out of bed to basically say, these are the right calls that we need to make, or the right decisions that we need to take. But I think primarily these two things, as in, if at some point, say, the whole curiosity angle goes away, I think I'll know that basically, yeah, I need to stop doing what I'm doing, just because then it's not fun anymore for me. As in, any conversation, be it this or say the one that I've had previously, the next meeting, like if I don't go in with the idea of learning something from it, and saying, okay, how does this work? Why? Like I asked you a bunch of questions around how do you do things. So without that whole angle of curiosity or inquisitiveness, like things don't remain fun anymore.
Absolutely. No, I think that's spectacular to end on. If we can all take away the fact that asking ourselves what can we learn from a particular conversation or any exercise is, I think, a great way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Vasanth, for your valuable time. I think I superbly enjoyed this conversation and learned a ton about company building, learned a ton about what you are doing, and about all the amazing things that Small Case has been up to and how you make it happen. So thank you so much for your time. I'm sure everybody hearing in will take back some valuable lessons, and I hope you enjoyed it as well.
No, absolutely. I am really excited, like I said, to be part of this. Enjoyed the entire conversation, and I really love what you're doing. So I just hope you keep doing this more
Thank you
often.
so much. Thank you so much. It means a lot coming from you.